Ben sat at the dining table sipping his coffee when Kathy walked in, her face set in an unusual expression. He could sense something was coming, but nothing could prepare him for what she said next. With calm resolve, Kathy announced, "I have been having an affair with my boss, Alex." Her words were blunt, devoid of hesitation, and not a trace of guilt or remorse colored her voice. Kathy laid it out matter-of-factly, as though expecting it to be a conversation he needed to process and accept. In fact, she even assured him that she'd make sure he still got his share of physical intimacy, as though this could somehow compensate for the betrayal she had just confessed to. Ben stared at her in disbelief, trying to comprehend what he was hearing. The absurdity of the situation nearly made him laugh, but he quickly suppressed it, unable to look at the woman he had spent the last 3 years of his life with, who now appeared before him as a stranger. How could she sit there so casually discussing her affair, as if it were just another decision, another part of their life together? "I'm not going to sit here and pretend this is okay," Ben finally spoke, his voice low, a dry laugh escaping his lips. "If you think I'll just accept this, Kathy, you don't know me." The words stung both for him and apparently for her. Kathy's expression shifted to surprise, clearly not expecting his blunt rejection. She seemed to anticipate his frustration, but as he pushed his chair back to leave, her demeanor changed. A cold, almost menacing glint flickered in her eyes, her body language shifting. "Ben, sit down," she commanded, her voice taking on a chilling calmness. "You don't get to just walk out. I won't let you." Ben froze. The sharpness in her words made him hesitate for a moment, but the anger bubbling inside of him was too strong to ignore. "What are you going to do, Kathy? Threaten me?" He could feel the power dynamics shifting, and it was becoming clearer that Kathy wasn't going to let him leave this easily. Her next words were as cold as they were calculated. "You think you can just leave me and walk away from this? Find a lawyer and be done with me?" "No, Ben, I'll ruin you if you try that," she said. "I'll go to the police. I'll tell them you hit me, that you threatened me. You think they'll believe you, some accountant nobody's heard of, or a well-respected attorney like Alex?" She paused, looking at him with a twisted, smug smile that only further deepened his growing sense of betrayal. "I'll make sure you have nothing left," she added, leaning in closer. Ben's pulse quickened, the anger building inside him like a pressure cooker. How could she be so cruel, threatening him like this after what she had done? The thought of her betrayal had already cut deep, but now the woman he thought he knew was threatening to take everything from him, everything he had worked for. She wasn't just destroying their marriage, she was threatening to tear apart his life, his career, and his dignity. "You don't scare me," Ben replied, his voice firm, though a trace of doubt lingered. Kathy seemed to enjoy seeing him struggle, with another cold smile. She sat back and crossed her arms, her expression shifting into one of satisfaction. "Well, let's see how you feel tomorrow," she said, standing up and walking toward the door. "Alex is coming over tomorrow. You'll meet him, and I want you to behave. Be a nice boy, Ben." Ben's mind reeled. This was the last straw. His wife was asking him to act like a servant to the man who had betrayed him, to sit across from him and be cordial, to be in the same room with the man who had taken everything Ben had held dear. His blood boiled, but he stayed silent, refusing to give Kathy the satisfaction of seeing his anger. "Are you serious?" he said, his voice low but filled with disbelief. "You really think I'll play nice with this guy?" Kathy met his gaze, her smile now a twisted, almost mocking expression. "I think you'll do exactly what I say, or else." Ben's fists clenched, his mind racing with thoughts of how to deal with this humiliation. Kathy had already destroyed their marriage, and now she was making him live out a nightmare by forcing him to meet the man she had been sleeping with. He couldn't believe this was happening. He had been married to this woman for 3 years, and now she was demanding that he accept her affair as a part of their life. But Ben refused to let her have that power over him. "Out," he said, his voice steady but filled with growing fury. "You'll regret this. Trust me." Kathy walked out of the room, leaving Ben alone to process the absurdity of what was unfolding in his life. His marriage, his sense of security, everything he had known was collapsing in an instant. But something inside him stirred. He wasn't going to let Kathy walk all over him. She had underestimated him. Ben had always been the quiet one, the calm one, but he knew there was power in restraint, and he would use that power to take control of his life again. He wasn't going to be a passive participant in his own destruction. The following day, as Kathy greeted Alex at the door with forced cheerfulness, Ben stood in the living room nursing a glass of Jack Daniels, trying to prepare himself for the ridiculousness that was about to unfold. His heart was heavy with betrayal, but his mind was sharp. This was no longer about saving his marriage. It was about reclaiming his dignity, his life. When Alex walked into the room, Ben couldn't suppress the laugh that bubbled up from his chest. The man Kathy had thrown everything away for, this so-called alpha male, was not what Ben had expected at all. Alex was shorter than Ben, overweight, and appeared entirely out of place in Ben's home. The contrast between the man Kathy had been so infatuated with and the man standing before him was absurd. "This is the guy you call an alpha?" Ben scoffed. "He looks like a leprechaun." Kathy's face flushed with anger, but Ben wasn't backing down. He wasn't going to play by her rules anymore. He had lost everything, but he wasn't going to lose his self-respect. As Alex stood there, unsure of how to respond, Ben leaned back and continued, "You think you can just waltz into my home and take what's mine? I don't think so." Kathy, her anger rising, snapped, "Watch your mouth, Ben. Alex is everything you're not." But Ben wasn't intimidated. "Is this your idea of an alpha, Kathy?" Ben continued, his voice full of mocking defiance. "You really think this guy has control over anything?" The exchange continued, tense and charged with the weight of betrayal. Ben's mind raced with the absurdity of it all, but beneath the anger he felt something else. Clarity. The game had changed. Kathy had made her move, but now it was Ben's turn. He wasn't going to let her or Alex ruin him. The evening dragged on as the confrontation continued, with both Ben and Alex exchanging barbs and Kathy attempting to maintain control of the situation. But Ben had one final thing to say. "Alex, you think you're going to take my life from me? Think again, because everything you think you're entitled to is gone." As the scene escalated, the stakes grew higher. What was supposed to be a simple, humiliating encounter had turned into something much more, and Ben was ready to take action to turn the tables, no matter what it cost him. He wasn't going down without a fight. As the evening dragged on, the tension in the room continued to grow. Ben stood at the center, his hands clenched into fists, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind racing with fury, thoughts of revenge clouding his judgment. He had spent years building a life with Kathy, investing everything into their marriage. And now she was casually sitting in front of him, flaunting the man who had destroyed it all. Ben couldn't believe what was happening. He could still remember the days when he and Kathy had laughed together, when they had shared dreams of growing old together, watching their children grow up. Now those dreams were shattered. and the woman he loved had betrayed him, breaking their vows with a man who, frankly, didn't deserve a second glance from her. Alex, sensing the growing animosity, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He didn't know how to react to Ben's derisive attitude, and Kathy, while trying to maintain control of the situation, couldn't hide the discomfort in her own eyes. Ben could see the guilt, the hesitation in Kathy's posture, as though she didn't quite know how to handle what was happening. But that didn't matter anymore. Kathy had made her choice, and Ben wasn't going to let her think she could get away with it. "You really think this is how this is going to end, Kathy?" Ben finally spoke, his voice low and controlled, his eyes locked onto hers. "You think you can just waltz out of this with no consequences? That I'll just accept this betrayal and let you go off with him? I'm not going to let that happen." Kathy's face paled as she tried to collect herself, but there was no hiding from Ben's gaze. She had crossed a line, and she knew it. "Ben, please, it's not what you think. I made a mistake," she stammered, her voice cracking, but it was too late for apologies. There was no going back now. Ben had seen the truth, and there was no way Kathy could fix it. Alex, uncomfortable with the rising tension, cleared his throat and tried to intervene. "Hey, let's just calm down," but Ben wasn't having it. He turned his gaze on Alex, his voice sharp and mocking. "You stay out of this. You've already taken what's mine. Don't think you get to say anything now." Alex looked taken aback, but Ben didn't care. He was done with the politeness, done with holding back. Kathy had taken everything from him, and now it was his turn to take control. He had nothing left to lose, and the cold fury that had been simmering in his chest for days finally erupted. Turning to Kathy, Ben spoke again, this time with a slow, deliberate calmness. "You know what? You can have him. You can have whatever you want. I've had enough. But before I go, I think it's time you learned a valuable lesson about betrayal." Kathy's face went white as she realized what Ben was talking about. "What? What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You'll see," Ben said simply, then turned to Alex. "As for you, Alex, you better hope you get out of here without too much trouble. This isn't over." Ben stood there, arms crossed, watching as Alex awkwardly shuffled out of the house. He had no intention of letting him off easy, but for now he would deal with Kathy. He wasn't going to let her walk away from this so easily. The game she played had gone on long enough. Kathy, left alone with Ben, started to cry, her tears streaming down her face. "Please, Ben, I didn't mean for it to happen. I'm sorry. I made a mistake, I swear. Please don't do this. I'll do anything to fix this." Ben looked at her, his anger now cooling into cold detachment. "It's too late, Kathy. You don't get to break my heart and then just ask for forgiveness. You don't get to mess with my life and then cry about it." The next few days were a blur of confusion and pain for Ben. He spent hours reflecting on the choices he had made, on the life he had built with Kathy, and on the family they had started together. But now, everything was tainted. He couldn't go back. He couldn't unsee the images that had been burned into his mind. Kathy in Alex's arms, Kathy betraying him in the most painful way possible. Finally, a few days later, Tom came through with what Ben had asked for: the evidence, photos, text messages, and recorded conversations between Kathy and Alex that showed just how deep the affair had gone. It wasn't just a one-time mistake. It was an ongoing betrayal, a series of lies that had shattered everything. Ben knew what he had to do. He sat down with Kathy, the pictures and recordings spread out before them on the table. The evidence of her infidelity was undeniable. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He simply placed the pictures in front of her and said, "This is what you've done. This is the reality of your actions, and now you have to live with the consequences." Kathy gasped as she saw the evidence, her hands trembling as she picked up the pictures.
"I didn't mean for it to go this far, Ben. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ben stood up, his face hardening. "You've already hurt me, and now you're going to pay for it." He moved quickly, gathering
his things and leaving their house for good. He wasn't going to be a part of her twisted game anymore. But the revenge didn't stop there. Ben had made sure Kathy's life would be just as destroyed as his had been. He made sure she would lose everything. He contacted the lawyer and filed for divorce, but this wasn't just any divorce. Ben was going after everything: custody of the kids, half of the property, and he wasn't leaving anything to Kathy. He knew it would be messy, but he didn't care. Kathy had crossed a line, and now he was going to make her pay. Ben's strategy was simple but cruel. He would make sure Kathy faced public humiliation. He made sure her affair with Alex was well known to their friends, their family, and even their social circle. The walls were closing in on her, and there was nowhere for her to hide. The court proceedings were just as brutal. Kathy fought tooth and nail to maintain her dignity, but it was all in vain. With the photos, text messages, and recorded evidence in hand, Ben had all the ammunition he needed. He won full custody of the kids, the house, and everything that had once belonged to both of them. As Ben left the courthouse, he couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. Kathy had done this to herself. She had ruined their family, their marriage, and everything they had built together. Now it was his turn to walk away, to rebuild his life without her. But Ben wasn't going to move on immediately. He took his time, making sure Kathy felt the weight of her actions. He continued to make life difficult for her, using every tool at his disposal. He made sure she couldn't escape the consequences of what she had done. In the end, Kathy was left with nothing: no marriage, no family, and no future with Alex. Her life was in ruins, and it was all because of the choices she had made. And Ben, he had lost something too, but he had regained something far more valuable: his dignity, his strength, and his ability to move forward.